This story goes back a couple of years, right before school let out for the summer. It was the last day of 8th grade, the kind of day where the halls are buzzing with energy and everyone's trying to hold on to those last moments of being a middle schooler. People were running around with yearbooks in hand, getting signatures and scribbled jokes, inside jokes, even the occasional "have a great summer" with way too many exclamation marks. My school was massive, like over 1,000 students kind of massive. So to make the yearbook signing process less chaotic, the teachers collected them all and rotated them around the classrooms. That way, everyone had a shot at signing everyone else's book. It seemed like a decent plan at first, but you can probably imagine how that could go wrong. Basically, it turned into a free-for-all. Anyone could write whatever they wanted in anyone's yearbook. And while the teachers tried to monitor it, there were still a few kids who took advantage, writing rude or nasty stuff to classmates they didn't like. When I finally got my yearbook back at the end of the day, I flipped through it, laughing at all the dumb inside jokes and weird doodles my friends left. But then, one thing caught my attention. A name. A signature. Underneath a face I didn't recognize. The name read Samuel Robinson III, and what he wrote wasn't exactly heartwarming. It just said, "Hags, I'll be seeing you again." That's it. Simple. But for some reason, it made my stomach twist. I stared at it for a while, confused. I had never talked to anyone named Sam Robinson. I didn't even know what he looked like. His photo was in the yearbook, but I couldn't recall ever seeing him around school. I figured maybe he just blended in and I never noticed. Or maybe it was a mistake, some random kid just being weird. I tried not to let it get to me. Later that night, I was hosting a sleepover at my place. It was me and my 3 best friends, Kevin, David, and Kieran. We were in the basement, gaming and scarfing down way too many Doritos, being as loud as we wanted because my parents' bedroom was way up on the 3rd floor. It was perfect. At one point, around 2 a.m., we were taking turns on my dad's old rowing machine. Don't ask why, it just became a thing. And that's when we heard a loud, sharp knock on the storm door. We all froze. Now, just to paint the picture, this was the back entrance to my basement. No one ever knocked on that door, like ever. So the only explanation was that whoever was out there knew we were in the basement and didn't want to wake up my parents upstairs, which of course made the whole thing even creepier. Then the knocking started again. Same pattern, same intensity. It felt deliberate. Kieran, being Kieran, called out loudly, "Who's there?" I nearly tackled him. Seriously. Now whoever was out there knew for sure that we were down there. Before, maybe they were guessing. Now they knew. There was a long pause, and then a voice replied through the door. "Come around to the back door." He sounded cheerful. Too cheerful. Like he was just another one of our friends trying to crash the sleepover. It was a teenager's voice, no doubt about it, but it didn't sound fake or put on, just weirdly upbeat. I was on edge. My friends, on the other hand, they thought it was hilarious. They egged me on to go check it out. I didn't want to, but peer pressure is a powerful thing. So we tiptoed upstairs, careful not to make any noise. When I got to the back door and peeked through the small glass pane, I saw him. I swear I stopped breathing for a second. It was him, Samuel Robinson III. The same face from the yearbook, the one who wrote that creepy message. My friends didn't recognize him and were about to open the door, no hesitation, but I stopped them just in time. I quickly explained what I saw in the yearbook, and that definitely changed the mood in the room. The weird thing was, Sam was still standing there, just watching us through the door. And then, without saying a word, he started gesturing for me to go to the window, like he wanted to talk, but in private. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't we just call the cops? But here's the thing. He was just a kid, a teenager, same age as us. It wasn't like some creepy old guy had shown up. So, in our minds, it didn't feel like a real threat, just weird. Still, I wasn't about to open that door. So I cracked the kitchen window open just a little, barely an inch, and asked him what he wanted. He leaned in with this weird smile and said, "Oh, so you got my message." Like we were picking up a conversation we had started earlier. Then he introduced himself. "I'm Sam," he said. "I always watched you from afar. We could have been good friends." Now, I was freaking out internally. I nodded and agreed just to keep him calm, but there was no way on earth I would have ever been friends with this dude. I tried to keep things chill, but I had to ask, "How did you know where I live?" He didn't answer. That silence, it was heavy. Before I could ask anything else, David, never one to hold his tongue, called him a creepy stalker and told him to leave. And that's when Sam snapped. The friendly mask dropped, and in its place was this twisted look of pure hate. He started screaming, saying how much he hated us, how we should all die, how my ex hated me, which was a weird and very specific detail, by the way. He started slamming on the window, trying to force it open. I slammed it shut and locked it just in time. He kept pounding on it, snarling like some kind of animal. It was terrifying. Luckily, we had made enough noise that my parents woke up and came rushing downstairs. The second they appeared, Sam took off into the night. My dad ran outside in his boxers to chase him, but by the time he got out there, the kid was already gone. Here's the crazy part. My parents didn't even call the police. I don't know why. Maybe they didn't want to escalate things. Maybe they thought he was just troubled. They said they'd talk to the school the next morning. And they did. But that's when we found out something even more disturbing. The school told us that Samuel Robinson III, had been expelled a few weeks before the year even ended. So yeah, he wasn't even supposed to be at school on the last day. But because the yearbooks had been printed earlier in the semester, his photo was still included, which meant somehow he had snuck into the school on the final day just to find my yearbook and leave that message. That realization hit me like a truck. He had no reason to be there. He wasn't a student anymore, but he still showed up, found my book, and wrote that chilling line, "Hags, I'll be seeing you again." It wasn't some prank. It wasn't just a weird coincidence. This was deliberate. And then I couldn't stop thinking about the bigger question. How did he know where I lived? That's what stuck with me the most. Not the note, not the fact that he showed up in the middle of the night, but the fact that somehow he had figured out my exact address and showed up like he'd done it 100 times before. No one could figure it out. The school had no contact info for him anymore. They couldn't reach his parents, guardians, anyone. It was like he'd just disappeared. He wasn't enrolled anywhere else, and the phone number the school had on file was disconnected. The whole thing caused a bit of a stir, but the school did everything they could to keep it from becoming public. I guess they didn't want parents freaking out or the district getting involved. For a while after that, my parents were on edge. We all were. They installed cameras, made sure the doors were always locked, and even talked about moving. But we never did. And eventually, time passed. We stopped talking about it. It just became one of those things you try to forget because it makes you uncomfortable. But to this day, even now, living in that same house, it doesn't feel the same anymore. Now I've got another story, one that still keeps me up sometimes, not because of a creepy kid like Sam, but because of someone I actually knew. His name's Garrett, and if I had to describe him in one word, unhinged. He's that guy, the one who brags about being crazy like it's a badge of honor, gets into fights just to prove a point, can't walk away from any confrontation without throwing some kind of insult. Always in the gym, barely ever home. We've had a lot of stories together, 5 I could tell off the top of my head. But this is the one that really shook me. It was just a couple of weeks ago, last day of senior year, May 2019. Graduation was coming up in a few days, but technically school was over. So, as per tradition, the seniors were out in full force. There's this massive clock tower at the center of campus where everyone gathers to party on the final night. We were there around 10 p.m. and the place was packed. Easily 1,000 people crammed into the courtyard. It was wild. Laughing, hugging, drinking, music blaring. For me, it was bittersweet. I was glad school was done, but saying goodbye to that chapter of life was hitting a little harder than I expected. There were 6 of us walking home that night. Me, C, T, R, N, and of course, Garrett. We lived off campus, which meant walking through part of the city to get back. And like most cities, especially late at night, there were a decent number of homeless people around. Usually they kept to themselves, zoned out, or just wandering. But not this guy. As we crossed the street, this random homeless man came straight at us, arms waving, yelling nonsense like he was guarding the other side of the street or something. I think he was tweaking hard. Most of us just gave him a wide berth, walked around him, kept our heads down. But Garrett, he didn't play it cool. He started yelling back. "Get the hell out of the street! Stop harassing people!" Now the guy didn't like that. He took a step toward Garrett, puffed up like he was ready to throw hands. But before things could escalate, the rest of us stepped in and separated them. The guy backed off, just yelling random stuff now. Garrett was laughing like he thought the whole thing was hilarious. We kept walking, thinking it was over. Spoiler, it wasn't. About a minute later, we noticed the guy was following us. When we looked back, he shouted, "You made a big mistake!" And then something weird. He said he was going to call a niche.
Yeah, a niche. No idea what that meant. Maybe it was code? Or maybe he was just rambling. Either way, we didn't take it seriously. We heckled him a bit, told him to leave us alone, but I think that only made him more fired up. After a few blocks, he was still trailing us. Not close, but close enough to make us uncomfortable. I told the group I didn't want him following us all the way home. The others agreed. But Garrett? He took off running straight at the guy again. The dude bolted, of course. Garrett came back laughing, and we all assumed that was that. We got back to our house. The vibes were chill again. I won't get into the details of what we did after that, but let's just say it was a mix of junk food, more alcohol, and things that made us feel like we were in a college comedy movie. I couldn't tell you what time it was when I stumbled out to grab my DoorDash from the porch, but as I walked outside, something caught my eye. The side gate leading into our backyard was wide open. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but we always kept that thing tied shut with a piece of twine, not locked, but enough so it wouldn't swing open unless someone deliberately untied it. I froze. The only thought in my head was, he found us. That guy from the street, the one Garrett chased, he was here. Now, let me be clear. I wasn't exactly sober at the time. I connected the dots just fine, but I wasn't thinking straight. Instead of waking up the guys or calling anyone, I decided to go check it out myself. Yeah, not my brightest moment. I dropped my DoorDash on the porch and started walking around the house, trying to keep my footsteps steady. I rounded the corner into the backyard, and before I could even react, I felt something tighten around my neck. Rope. He'd looped a rope around my throat from behind and was pulling hard. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. All I could do was claw at the rope and try to stay conscious. The frayed fibers were digging into my skin, and I genuinely thought that was it. Out of pure panic, I threw my legs backward, hitting him hard enough that he lost balance. We both went crashing to the ground. I gasped for air, coughing, my throat burning, but he was still on top of me. He started scratching at my face, wild, frenzied, like a wild animal. I could feel my skin tear and the blood start to drip. Pure adrenaline took over, and I shoved him off with everything I had. He stumbled, got to his feet, and then ran,
disappearing into the dark like he'd never been there at all. I stood there for a second, blood on my face, heart pounding so loud I thought it might explode. Then I turned and ran inside. I didn't even make it past the living room before collapsing. My friends freaked out when they saw me. Garrett in particular was shaken, silent for once, which was a rarity. They took me to the ER that night. The cuts weren't deep, thankfully, but they weren't minor either. I needed shots, tetanus, rabies, everything the doctors could think of because none of us knew what that guy might have had. The worst part? The police didn't help at all. We told them everything. The guy, the chase, the rope, the open gate. And their response was, basically, well, you're moving out next week, right? Like, that was supposed to make us feel better. And yeah, I was moving. It was my last week in that house before heading off to start a new chapter. But the idea that some unstable stranger had followed us home, watched us, waited for a moment when I was alone, and then tried to kill me? That never really goes away. My graduation photos? Covered in scratches. I looked like I'd been in a street fight. Garrett actually felt awful about the whole thing, so much so that he treated me to a fancy dinner at this steak place downtown. It was his weird way of saying sorry, I guess. But I never blamed him for what happened, not really. Yeah, he provoked the guy. Yeah, he escalated everything. But none of us knew things would go that far. Still, I do hope he learned something from it, about antagonizing people who have nothing left to lose. Now, if you thought that was the end, there's one more story I want to share. This one happened when I was in 7th grade, and it wasn't about a stalker or a homeless guy or a confrontation gone wrong. It was about a kid named Sven. Sven was weird, even by middle school standards. He kept to himself, didn't talk much, always wore the same outfit, cargo shorts and a giant burgundy hoodie, no matter the weather. People tried to include him sometimes, group projects, lunch tables, gym teams, but he never really joined in, just existed quietly in the background. He had a deep voice too, one that didn't fit his body, the kind of voice that would get laughs when teachers called on him to read. It wasn't his fault, but you know how middle school is. He always sat in the back corner of every class, same spot, opposite the door. And at recess, he'd go stand next to the fence at the edge of school grounds, just standing off into the woods. Every single day. Some kids claim they saw him talking to someone on the other side of that fence. I never saw that, so I can't confirm. But I do remember my friend Tyler catching him cutting worms with scissors once. Yeah, he got detention for that. Anyway, it was the last day of school. Teachers were relaxed, kids were running all over the place, sneaking into other classes, messing with routines. It was like an unofficial tradition, just harmless chaos. That day, I ended up in a class where Sven was the only person I even remotely knew. All my other friends had dipped to other rooms. I stayed behind. Sven? He was acting off. More off than usual, I mean. He kept tapping his foot non-stop and glancing around the room like he was looking for someone or something. It didn't seem like he was watching me, but it was hard to tell. And here's the weird part. There were a lot of kids I didn't recognize in that classroom. I don't mean a few. I mean enough that it made me feel like I was the one in the wrong room. At some point, the teacher, Miss Bell, told us to get into groups and do a reflection worksheet. Total fluff assignment. Then, out of nowhere, she picked up the classroom phone and turned her back to us. A few minutes later, another teacher from the room next door stepped in. The two of them quietly stepped into the hallway and had a hushed conversation. It was tense. Miss Bell came back, still not saying anything, and walked over to 3 specific kids. She knelt down next to their desks and whispered something. One by one, they stood up and followed her out. No explanation, no one really reacted. It was like I was the only one who noticed. And then, just as she sat back down, the fire alarm went off. Miss Bell didn't even flinch. She just told us to line up and head outside. So we did. We joined the rest of the school on the back field, grouped by homerooms. I found my regular classmates again. Everyone was chatting, laughing, messing around. But I turned to look back at the school. And I swear, I saw something move in one of the second-floor windows. It was fast, a shadow, a flicker, maybe nothing, but the school was supposed to be empty. A few minutes later, sirens, then cop cars, lots of them. Officers rushed straight into the building. And still, no one said a word to us. Eventually, someone came around and said school was being let out early. No buses, we had to call our parents. Later that night, my mom told me what the school had told her. A group of kids who didn't even go to our school had snuck in. They had brought things, tools apparently, that made the staff very concerned. Some kind of plan to cause harm, maybe even set the place on fire. The theory? Sven let them in, through the side fence, during recess. I never saw him again. To this day, I still don't know what would have happened if Miss Bell hadn't noticed something was off, or if we hadn't been evacuated in time. But I do know this. Sometimes the scariest people aren't strangers. They're the ones who sit in the back of your class, who keep to themselves, who watch.